There are moments in history when a nation does not just build a machine, it sends a message to the world. The SR-71 Blackbird was one of those moments. In the darkest tension of the Cold War, when the United States needed eyes in the sky that could not be stopped, American engineers created something so advanced, so aggressive, and so far ahead of its time that even now, decades after its retirement, it still feels like a weapon from the future. This was not just an airplane. This was American ambition forged into titanium. It was speed turned into strategy, intelligence turned into dominance, and engineering turned into a warning. The SR-71 did not carry bombs. It did not need missiles. Its power was far more terrifying than that. Its power was the ability to go anywhere, see everything, and leave before the enemy could even understand what had happened. And that is what made the Blackbird one of the greatest achievements in American aviation history. To understand why the SR-71 mattered so much, you have to go back to a world divided by fear. The Cold War was not fought only with armies and nuclear stockpiles. It was fought with information. Whoever knew more had the advantage. Whoever could see the enemy's next move first could shape the future. In the 1950s, the United States relied heavily on the U-2 spy plane to fly over hostile territory and photograph Soviet military installations. For a while, that worked. The U-2 could fly higher than most threats could reach, and it gave America a critical edge. But that edge would not last forever. In 1960, when a Soviet missile shot down a U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers, it became painfully clear that the old way of spying was no longer safe enough. America needed something better, not slightly better, radically better. It needed an aircraft that could fly higher, faster, and with such a small radar signature that even when the enemy saw something, they would barely understand what they were looking at. That challenge landed in the hands of Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works, led by one of the greatest aerospace minds America ever produced, Clarence Kelly Johnson. This was the kind of team that existed for the impossible. When the nation needed a breakthrough, these were the people who delivered it. They did not think in small improvements. They thought in leaps. They knew that if the United States wanted to stay ahead, it needed an airplane that pushed beyond conventional limits in every direction at once. It had to cruise above 80,000 feet, run at more than 3 times the speed of sound, survive temperatures that would destroy normal aircraft, and remain difficult enough to track that enemy defenses could not reliably stop it. That sounds ambitious today. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, it sounded almost insane. But this is exactly the kind of insanity that built American aerospace supremacy. Before the SR-71 itself emerged, the program evolved through earlier aircraft like the A-12, a sleek and secretive reconnaissance platform built for the CIA. That aircraft proved the concept could work, and from that foundation came the Blackbird that would enter history. The SR-71 was larger, heavier, more capable, and designed for the United States Air Force, with 2 crew members instead of 1. One man flew the aircraft. The other managed the reconnaissance systems that made the mission possible. It was not just a fast airplane, it was a complete strategic intelligence platform, able to collect critical information in places where satellites were limited and where timing mattered too much to wait. Its first flight took place in December 1964, And when it began operational service in the late 1960s, the world had never seen anything like it. What made the Blackbird so extraordinary was not one single feature, but the fact that everything about it had to be reinvented. Start with speed. The SR-71 cruised at about Mach 3.2, more than 3 times the speed of sound, faster than 2,000 miles per hour. To put that into perspective, most commercial airliners fly at roughly 1/4 of that speed. Even many advanced fighter jets cannot match what the Blackbird did routinely. And this was not a brief sprint. The SR-71 could sustain those speeds for hours. That level of performance was not just impressive, it was strategic. If an enemy launched a missile, the Blackbird's answer was often brutally simple: push the throttles forward and outrun the threat. That is not a movie line. That was real doctrine. Thousands of missiles were fired at Blackbirds over the course of their operational life, and not one ever brought one down. But speed at that level creates brutal problems. At Mach 3, the air itself becomes an enemy. Friction heats the skin of the aircraft to extreme temperatures. Some sections of the Blackbird became hot enough to make conventional aluminum construction completely useless. So, American engineers built the aircraft mostly out of titanium, a material strong enough and heat-resistant enough to survive those conditions. That alone was a monumental accomplishment. Titanium was difficult to machine, difficult to shape, and required entirely new methods of manufacturing. In other words, America did not just design a new aircraft. It had to build new tools, new processes, and new industrial capabilities just to make the aircraft possible. This is one of the most underrated parts of the Blackbird story. The airplane itself was a masterpiece, but the system that created it was also a masterpiece of American ingenuity. Then, there is one of the most fascinating ironies in aviation history. The United States needed massive amounts of titanium for the Blackbird program, but did not have enough easy access to it. So through covert methods and complex procurement channels, large quantities of titanium were ultimately sourced from the Soviet Union itself, the very adversary the SR-71 was designed to monitor. That means part of the metal used to build one of America's most advanced Cold War spy planes came from the nation it would later help outmaneuver. That detail alone sounds too perfect to be true, but it captures the spirit of the era: intelligence, deception, and strategic brilliance everywhere. The engines were just as remarkable as the airframe. The SR-71 was powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney J58 engines, and these were not ordinary jet engines by any stretch. At lower speeds, they behaved more like traditional turbojets, but at the speeds the Blackbird was designed for, they began operating in a way that resembled a ramjet. As the aircraft accelerated, more and more of the airflow bypassed the core of the engine and fed the afterburner system directly, allowing the airplane to become more efficient at extreme speed. That sounds backwards to most people, but it is true. The Blackbird was built for that world. It was happiest in the realm where most aircraft would fall apart. By the time it was cruising at Mach 3, the engine system was doing exactly what it had been built to do, turning speed itself into an advantage. One of the keys to making those engines work was the distinctive conical spike at the front of each nacelle. That spike was not there for style. It was a critical aerodynamic device used to manage shock waves and control the way supersonic air entered the engine. At those speeds, The air rushing into the intake was moving too fast and carrying too much heat to be useful in a normal sense. The spike moved depending on the flight conditions, helping position the shock wave in the right place to slow the air down to something the engine could work with. It was one more example of how every visible line on the Blackbird had a reason. Nothing on that airplane was accidental. Its beauty came from pure function, and its function came from solving problems that almost no one else in the world even knew how to approach. Fuel was another challenge. The SR-71 could not simply use standard jet fuel. It relied on a specialized fuel called JP7, chosen because it was stable enough to handle the intense temperatures produced during high-speed flight. The aircraft was so hot in operation that the fuel itself was used as a coolant circulating through heat exchangers to help manage temperatures before being burned. And because JP7 was difficult to ignite, a chemical called triethylberine was used to light it, producing a distinctive green flash during engine starts and afterburner ignition. Even the act of starting the airplane looked like science fiction. Everything about the Blackbird felt like it belonged to a civilization slightly more advanced than the one that built it. The aircraft's heat issues went far beyond the engines. At cruise speed, the skin of the Blackbird could heat up so much that the fuselage physically expanded in flight. Engineers had to account for that in the structure itself. Panels were designed with gaps so they would fit correctly only after the aircraft heated up in the air. That led to one of the most famous quirks of the SR-71. When it sat on the ground, it leaked fuel. To an uninformed observer, that would look like a serious flaw. In reality, it was simply part of the design. The airplane was built to become whole at speed, not while sitting still. The Blackbird was never meant to live comfortably on the ground. It belonged at altitude, at Mach 3, where the heat sealed its structure into the form it was always meant to be. Its black paint also served a purpose. Yes, it helped give the airplane its iconic name, the Blackbird, but it also aided with thermal management by helping radiate heat away from the airframe. On top of that, the aircraft's shape and materials were designed to reduce radar detectability. Today, stealth is a familiar concept because of aircraft like the F-22 and B-2. But in the era when the Blackbird was born, this was pioneering work. Its Chinese, its blended fuselage, its carefully shaped surfaces, and its specialized coatings all contributed to lowering its radar signature. It was not invisible, but it was deceptive. On a radar screen, it could appear smaller and more ambiguous than expected. Combined with its altitude and speed, that made it one of the hardest aircraft in the world to deal with. Navigation at those speeds was another engineering battle. At Mach 3, small errors become massive very quickly. A slight heading mistake can translate into huge deviations across long distances, and visual references are almost useless when you are flying above 80,000 feet faster than anything around you. So the SR-71 used a highly advanced astro-inertial navigation system that tracked stars and combined that data with inertial guidance to determine the aircraft's position with incredible precision. Let that sink in. This was a Cold War aircraft using the stars to navigate at the edge of space while racing across the planet faster than rifle bullets. That is how far ahead of its time this machine really was. The system fed data into autopilot functions and helped the aircraft remain on its pre-planned route with remarkable accuracy, allowing its reconnaissance systems to capture what needed to be seen when seconds mattered. And those reconnaissance systems were the entire point. The SR-71 carried no offensive weapons. It did not need to fight in the traditional sense because its mission was different. It was there to gather intelligence, to photograph hostile territory, to scan radar networks, to map military activity, and to bring back information that could influence national strategy. In one mission, it could survey enormous areas of land that would have taken much longer to monitor through other means. During an age when reliable, timely intelligence could mean the difference between stability and escalation, the Blackbird gave the United States something priceless: confidence based on facts. It could verify what adversaries were doing instead of relying on guesses. It could show leaders what was real. In the Cold War, that kind of knowledge was power. The Blackbird proved its value in some of the most dangerous regions on Earth. It operated from bases like Kadena in Okinawa and flew missions related to Vietnam, the Middle East, North Korea, Libya, and other geopolitical flashpoints. It could monitor troop movements, missile sites, air defenses, and strategic infrastructure with unmatched speed. It was often detected, yes, but detection did not equal defeat. Enemy radar operators could see something crossing their screens at impossible speed. Missile crews could launch, interceptors could be scrambled, but the result was almost always the same. The Blackbird was already gone. One famous story tells of a pilot receiving a missile warning and simply accelerating until the threat disappeared. That was the reality of flying an aircraft built so far beyond the enemy's reach that even their best response often arrived too late. This gave the SR-71 a reputation bordering on myth. To the American public, it became a symbol of technological superiority. To military planners, it was an instrument of strategic certainty. To adversaries, it was infuriating. Imagine spending enormous resources building radar systems, interceptor aircraft, and surface-to-air missiles, only to watch this black shape streak past faster than your defenses could solve the problem. Soviet aircraft like the MiG-25 and later the MiG-31 were among the few machines fast enough to be considered possible threats in theory. But even then, intercepting a Blackbird was an extraordinary challenge. The window was tiny, the margins were cruel. The Blackbird's combination of altitude, speed, and reduced radar signature made it one of the hardest targets ever to exist. And yet, for all its greatness, the Blackbird demanded a tremendous price. It was not easy to operate. It was not cheap to maintain. Every mission required careful planning, specialized crews, tankers loaded with its unique fuel, and hours upon hours of maintenance work on the ground. Some estimates suggest that 1 hour of flight could demand hundreds of man-hours of support. Out of the 32 aircraft built, several were lost in accidents. That is an important reminder that the SR-71 may have been unbeatable against enemies, but it still lived on the edge of physics. It was not forgiving. It was not simple. It was a machine that demanded excellence from everyone who touched it. Its pilots wore pressure suits like astronauts. They trained relentlessly. They followed strict procedures, even down to what they ate before flying. This was not ordinary military aviation. This was the razor's edge of American aerospace. By the 1980s and 1990s, new technologies began to challenge the Blackbird's role. Satellites could provide increasingly detailed imagery without risking crew members. Drones began emerging as alternative platforms for surveillance. Budgets became a battleground of their own, and the enormous operational cost of the SR-71 made it a target for cuts. The aircraft was retired, briefly reconsidered, partially reactivated, and eventually retired for good. Many believed that once it left service, something better would replace it directly. But that never really happened, not in the true sense. Yes, satellites took over some missions. Yes, drones filled other roles. But no manned aircraft stepped in and said, without question, "I can do what the Blackbird did, only better." That is what makes its legacy so extraordinary. It was not just great in its own era, it remains unique even now. In fact, one of the most stunning parts of the SR-71 story is that many of its official records still stand. It remains the fastest air-breathing manned aircraft ever built. It set speed and altitude records that decades of progress have not officially erased. One of its last great demonstrations was a record-setting cross-country flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., completed in just over an hour. Think about what that means. An aircraft designed in the early Cold War using slide rule-era engineering and manufacturing methods, crossing the United States at a speed that still sounds unreal today. That is not merely historical trivia. That is proof of how extraordinary the achievement truly was. The cultural legacy of the Blackbird is just as powerful as its military one. People still gather around museum displays and stare at it as if it landed from another century, because, in a way, it did. It looks futuristic even now. Its shape is clean, menacing, elegant, and unmistakable. Veterans speak about it with reverence. Aviation enthusiasts speak about it with awe. Engineers study it because it represents what happens when a country decides that average is unacceptable. The SR-71 was not built by a nation trying to catch up. It was built by a nation determined to lead. It embodied a kind of confidence that defined America at its best. If the challenge was enormous, then the solution would be even greater. And maybe that is why the Blackbird still matters so much. It is not only a story about speed, it is a story about national will. It is a story about what America can do when vision, urgency, talent, and courage all point in the same direction. In a time of enormous danger, the United States did not respond with hesitation. It responded with innovation. It responded with daring. It responded by building an aircraft so advanced that enemies could barely challenge it and allies could barely believe it existed. The SR-71 Blackbird was not just a spy plane. It was a statement. It told the world that American engineering could turn science fiction into reality and make that reality operational. Even now, long after its final flight, the Blackbird remains one of the clearest symbols of what American aerospace excellence looks like. It was a machine of titanium, fire, mathematics, and courage. It flew higher than almost anything else, faster than almost anything else, and with a purpose that shaped global strategy during one of the most dangerous periods in modern history. It saw what others could not. It survived what others could not. And it earned a place in history that no retirement date can erase. The SR-71 Blackbird was not merely the fastest. It was one of the boldest achievements America ever put into the sky. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because there is a lot more incredible aviation history to explore. And right now, there is another video on the screen that you can watch next, so click on it and keep going. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.